Munyu skula nyepamne ne kudlukula nyepangi ragala gena nyepamne ne kudlukula ibuloke nongoto ni beti sola ibuloke dato ni betoto
Bege gongo
Lamin
na
Lamin te jibe norin te nyame Lamin
kabana
wulo kono nyinta mo Lamin
pa bilenki
muna ngata afamole
haina
ngata Ngoto le Fabrama
mingi baba nyole
ngoto le Fabrama
namu jumala kan kuma diten
Fabrama
jumala mu
ndele bare muso
lunda mana
mo kata
jamani mbere
lindo ko
jamani
bari ngoto man kontande
bari jamani fana na ramudu wa kontan
ngoto minaka ngalamin je fon filitala lamin jibe nori nyala
lamin ila siran sama ne benki yala so tol sayni no ko molla ko momo
ngoto
nam
itedinte yalo ne lamin hakilo diata bake karambu ngoto anu santen ministry ko di ngole si suko na amake ko be holiday
sibitun
bagona de
ala ni ko kede namo balo
ala ni na ko na karta bulo be damen ala ni je
ngoto
nam
ngoto mon kontan fere
jamani mu ne keda
ifika lamin ki wulo ko no nyinta mon ko do fete malo lamin nyanta sila la be la moy kala karam
jamani karam mo be soron ne ko fasita wulo ko nako
baba
karam bu won ma soron ni ko karam wol soron da amake comme holiday lem ngoto dindi ngo nyanta sila la ala karam wala moy yamen kamen fue man kontan anda mande
alla nyin kombo kurang ada ndalla kombo len do la jankara mol soron daro kamen kurang ma daro la kombo e ko ndol fanena kara mol soron je kara mol soron lamin ada lo nyino la amanta ra fena sokon ala munekela
lamin ite foyde malon ko lesinol be ke kar radio to
nga fine
e ko yana di mod lamin ya mu na fonye
bi kabin mina kan tambita nteri maning fatu tambite la sukol ala dinngol bebe siri be la moy ka
faru dan so am fana tambita jele ni subala la ngaje dinngol be jet talanta nen kili waro e be seri jelet
sa lamin farante ku kili ko ke no la ba lamin bita ka wulo ko no nyin taymo alamin
amandara fenela
ite diga ko ni man si yakari lesinol la moy radio to e balon na
muneka ke afonye ba nyara ni alon
telentel jikot
afonye ba mu de be ke
ite balon tel be cikritel ni man karambe ku kele yaje nata karana mbasa malaya ay tarije
par ñarande kombo courant ho findira kombo ide nata yede ni sonka bay ko lamin mañata la wulo ko aru karam wolbe so da fa ñembe
ko to wole nati bawo ngalle ni lamin kuntala kombo courant o ka fa me kombo courant asototal wala kinay ko e sisu ko no bari ni ko e sisu ko no be karangol dike la radio lin telel to hani tele ma soto to nyaay man tele soto da bungo bar radio be bulen ko to batiri sanga ay si ay alama
sa do kala nyaadi
ko ta o bulaji
abe o kala nyaadi
kamun ke nyaadi
radio abe wala moy la be mona falaje
ibe la karandirol kala jele
ti jalle be radio ko men ka karande
ila subjector baby jele baby jele
wala nanga coco moy fa dan so wolya ngombe tambi kana ngadi ni wolje be ikadum bungo de ko kada maro mo
asototal de
la min mala be kara wala de
bari
laftalal ideal on ko inde every year second wala fourth
muna mi ko di ha ko nde ko folle sinila mba ndele sinilo ne ba
mba say mba foke en koto wole fango yen wulindi yalo famo keta bat yu fadam bulata ko ko me yen nati jambi la min nyanta karana ndel be jiko be nyineka ya bulay kara wulo kono ta kilar ya bambalo yo be bulaje koto dindi ngoy si ayala le sino la moy radio
wala ka munda kara mo man soro la men nyanta kara si so na radio
la sila le ayala le sino
ndane ko korna ko smalo
kilar ya
be ngala ko momo say mi do ni ko no kera
mengi bruzo
ndale ko ro la ba ro sa no radio ba no bari woro radio ni abe jele ba ngamra do man dembe buljan dala nyara nyar wo fara bu ko fendi mo la tan tayra ba ro sa
bara te ku folo ajibe nori nya labi tamete ku
teku
bari ko do famo ke
imagine nani nyambol si zol le keje kisiki man si zol no le kafun ka nyoma bari nyambu kilo ni manya na kafindi ni nambe ko zol la ga
ngalle limbeta de be nyambo do dilanna
nyara ni ko rin fennat nyara nata
ko to bari famo ke da
ngata bungono tambi bungono nyara ngando ko fele ko ke baru nganda ni pelo la dija
iyo awa better la
bungono bismillah bisu diara
ye fongo tanka sina dolu tanka koro ta koro
day, viewers and listeners. My name is Samuel Emendi. We are here again for another lesson in biology. Before I left you the last lesson, I gave you an assignment. The assignment was define the following terms: macronutrients, micronutrients, and I asked you in a tabular form to state 3 macro and micronutrients, their functions and their deficiency. So we are going to look at what are macronutrients. We said these are nutrients that are needed by the plant in large quantity. So these are essential or important nutrients that are needed by a plant in large quantity to maintain proper biochemical function of the plant. And we also look at micronutrients. So these are elements that are needed in small or trace quantity by the plant to maintain a proper biochemical function. So after that, we said the question says, in a tabular form, state 3 macro and micronutrients, their functions and their deficiency syndromes. So this is the tabular form that I stated here. And we look at nitrogen. We have here nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and calcium. We look at their functions and their deficiency symptoms. So like in nitrogen, what is the function? It helps in rapid plant growth. It also increases seed and fruit production. It also improves the quality of leaves and forage crops. When there is a deficiency of nitrogen, what happens? Poor plant growth, cirrhosis of the leaves remain small and drop prematurely. We also come to phosphorus, synthesis of nucleoproteins, important in photosynthesis and respiration, because these ones we have already talked about them in the last class. I just want to read and then we move on before it will take our time. And also we look at it leads to a stunted growth, delay flowering, leads to dead necrotic spots of the leaves. And then we also talk about potassium. What is the function? It maintains ionic balance of the cell. It regulates stomatal movement. We also talk about their deficiency. It leads to yellowing of leaves. It leads to a death of the cells or tissues. Growth is reduced. Because if you look at the instruction that I gave you in the question, I said in a tabular form. So it is very, very important when you are asked in a tabular form, you answer the question in a tabular form. It will make you not to be penalized for your marks, because if you don't follow the instruction, you might be penalized for your marks. So for you not to lose those marks, you just put it in a tabular form. Potassium, it also maintains ionic balance of the cell. It also regulates stomatal movement. What is the deficiency? It leads to yellowing of leaves. It leads to death of cells or tissue, and growth is reduced. We move on to calcium, important in synthesis of middle lamella, an activator of enzymes like amylases. Also the deficiency, rapid growth region, and then malformation of young leaves. And then we also look at micronutrients. The micronutrients, we look at iron, zinc, and molybdenum. We say iron is essential for chlorophyll synthesis. It maintains chloroplast structure and function. Iron, when there's a deficiency of iron, it leads to poor growth of plant. Iron and also lead to a yellowing of leaves when there's a deficiency. Zinc, we talk about also synthesis and growth regulation, essential for water uptake. Zinc also leads to a yellowing of leaves and stunted growth when there's a deficiency. Okay, the last but not the least, which is molybdenum, which says aid nitrogen fixing. And then when there's a deficiency, young leaves becomes twisted. So the young leaves becomes twisted. That was for the assignment. I hope those of you who have done it, I hope you are able to have some correct from there. And if you realize your mistakes, please correct it so that the next time you are not penalized. So, but for today's lesson, we are going to look at genetics. And in genetics, we are going to look at some definitions of what genetic. We are going to look at the definition of genetics, and we are also going to look at common genetic terms. And after common genetic terms, we are going to look at what monohybrid inheritance. So when you talk about genetics, one of the persons that is well known for genetics is Gregor Mendel. He was a monk and he lived in a monastery. So he was the one who talked about modern genetics, and people are now using it even in medicine. So first of all, we just want to define what is genetics. We say genetics is a branch of biology that is concerned with the study of heredity and variation. And when you talk about heredity, we talk about how genes are passed from the parent to their offspring. And variation, why some of this, the parent different with their offspring. So now we talk about, it's a branch of biology that deals with the study of what? Heredity and variation. That's what we call genetics. So the first thing that we are going to look at here is the chromosome. We are going to look at the genetic terms. The chromosome. If you look at this structure, you can see a chromosome is a structure that comes and joins at a certain place, which we call a centromere. And if you look at the labeling, this one chromosome, we have two identical chromatids. The top part of the chromosome is called the chromatid. And you have what you call the arm of the chromosome. And in the middle is called the centromere. And the other part is the arm of another chromosome. And in the last part, where there is an extension, that shows DNA. And when you talk about DNA, we talk about deoxyribonucleic acid. And you said, what are these chromosomes? What are the features of these chromosomes? We said chromosomes, they are thread-like structure present in the nucleus of the cell. They are basically found in the nucleus of the cell. And they are concerned with the transfer of characters from parent to the offspring. Okay, so these are information, or these characters, they are materials that are passed from the parent to their offspring. Sometimes these characters may look like whether the person is very, very active in sport, or the person is not active in sport. So some of these characters, whether the person is beautiful or the person is what? Handsome. Some of these characters are passed from the parent to their offspring. We also say that the chromosome, along the length of the chromosomes at regular intervals, are hereditary particles called genes. And then these genes, they determine the character of the organism. Some people, they have the gene for fairness. Those things, they inherit them from their parents. And some people, they have the gene for dark in complexion. They also inherit some of those characters from their parents. So these are what you call genetic material. This is what you call the chromosomes and the transfer of some of this material. Another thing also, we look at the gene. We say after the chromosome, we have the gene. You see, if you look at this slide, we can see in this slide, we have a cell. So now in this animal cell, there is what you call the chromosome. We extract the chromosome out. And in the chromosome, we cut some part of the chromosome and we remove the gene, the DNA. Inside the DNA, there are a lot of genes that code for certain reasons, or they code for specific information. We say these genes are hereditary particles located in the chromosome. They are the structures which actually determine the character of an individual. And these genes are the basic unit for inheritance. So the genes, they help material to be transferred from the parent to their offspring. Because if these materials are not transferred, the child will look like a different other person altogether. But genes need to be transferred from that of the parents to their offsprings. So now we look at a trait. Here we have a chart on a character trait. And sometimes we said this person is active, this person is adventurous, this person is cooperative, this person is lucky, is joyous, this person is lazy, this person is talkative, this person is witty. These things are passed, these traits are passed from the parents to their offspring, or either from their great-grandparents to the grandchildren. These materials or these traits are passed. Okay, it's through a hereditary. It's a traits. These are major or minor features or characters inherited by an organism. Example, your color of the eye, or the color of the skin. The person is generous. Sometimes if you stay with people who are so generous, they like to give out. So that sometimes you just build up some of those traits in you. You also want to help people. Whenever that you see people in need, you also want to help. But if you are with a community or with people who are stingy, they don't want to give out. Sometimes you just develop those things. And some of these characters, they are also passed from the parent to the offspring. And sometimes when those things happen, you develop those characters. You are also stingy like that. You don't want to give out. But there are some that are so pertinent that they are found in the gene. Those ones, they determine the character of the organism. So we come to what is zygote. All these characters that we are talking about is what Gregor Mendel used in his experiment. He was able to study and he was able to come out and bring out some of these terms. And he says, like one of the things is what we call a zygote. How is a zygote formed? During the process of fertilization. When there's a gamete from the male and there's a gamete from the female, and they fuse together, their offspring is called a zygote. If you look at the slide here, we have one of them is haploid and another one is haploid. So when this gamete, like the sperms and the egg, comes and fuse together to form a zygote, the zygote is having one haploid from the man and one haploid from the female. When they come together, they form what you call a diploid. You say a zygote is a single cell formed as a result of the union of the male and the female sex during reproduction. When the male and the female fuse, they form what you call a zygote. Like that offspring that they have, they call a zygote. And that zygote is in the form of a diploid. This other one is an allele. We say an alternate form of a gene is called an allele. If you look at this, we have two chromosomes. And these chromosomes, they have different alleles. Like they are marked by different alleles. The first part on top, the other end, on the top part is what the eye color. So all the allele for eye color is A, lowercase a, and the allele for blood type is also indicated red. And that one for hair color is dark blue, and growth is yellow. So these are marks that are the location. We say allele is an alternative form of a gene occupying the same place or a locus on a chromosome. They are occupying a same place on a locus in a chromosome. If you look at these two chromosomes, the place for growth, they are all occupied on the same allele. And that for the hair color, blood type, and eye color, they are all in the same place. And sometimes the allele is always the uppercase or the lowercase. Or sometimes when you blend the two, you have what you call an heterozygous. So we come to what you call a homozygous. A homozygous, we say this is a condition when an organism contains identical alleles, or the diploid condition in which the alleles at a given locus are identical. Example, uppercase A and lowercase a. We said, like for instance, we have a homozygous here. Either, if you look at these chromosomes, this form of the allele is uppercase A, the one that is uppercase B and lowercase b. And lowercase b, these are different alleles. This is in capital and this one is what? It's lowercase. And they are found on the what? On the chromosomes. It says, you say this is a condition when an organism contains identical alleles. A homozygous is an identical allele on the chromosome. Either they are found on the chromosome or in the chromosome, but they are identical alleles when you're talking about the homozygous. But also, when you talk about heterozygous, they are different forms. They are not identical. Okay, you see, an individual is said to be an heterozygous if the two alleles for a particular character are different. So when the two alleles are different, we said they are heterozygous. Like for instance, we are seeing here homozygous uppercase B, and when you come to the other image here, we have a heterozygous. That is an uppercase B and lowercase b. And then you also have what you call a homozygous at the other side and lowercase b. So when the alleles are different, they are not identical, we call them, they are heterozygotes. So this is a diploid condition in which the alleles at a given locus are different. Okay? We also go to a phenotypes. Phenotype is basically the outward appearance of an organism. Sometimes it's determined by the skin, whether you talk about the skin, the height. Like if you look at this flower, we have a purple flower and a white flower. So now here, the phenotypes of this flower, the purple one is purple, and the outward appearance, that means what you can see with your eyes. But when you look at the genotypes, you are looking at the genetic makeup of that flower. So if you look at the first one, the genetic makeup of the first flower is homozygous. The genetic makeup of the first flower is what? Homozygous. That means it's uppercase A. And the genetic makeup of what, the genotypes of what the second flower and the third flower is what? Heterozygous. That means that they are not equal, the alleles are not equal, is uppercase and lowercase p. And then the genetic makeup of the white flower is homozygous recessive. So that's why we have homozygous lowercase p. And if you look at the ratio is what? 3:1. How do we have 3:1? Because the one that are purple that you can see outwardly, there are 3, and the one that is, and only one that is what? Is white. That's why we have 3:1. So in the last slide, I already explained this, the genotype and the phenotype. So we look at dominant characters. What are dominant characters? You say this is a character that produces its effect, even if the opposite or the contrasting character is present. So now, like for instance, let me just take, for instance, you have two hands. You have the left and the right. Which of the two hands do you do most of your activities? It depends on the person. If you are a left-handed person, you do most of your writing with the left hand, or even cooking or doing most of the work with the left hand. And then if you're a right-hand person, you do most of your activities with the right hand. So you realize that your right hand, if you're a right-hand person, your right hand is dominant over the left hand. So if you're a left-handed person, your left hand is dominant over the right hand. So here, we are going to look at the characters, the dominant and their recessive. Like for instance, we have this flower. In this flower, we are talking about the color. So in the color, we realize that the purple is dominant, and the white one is what? Is recessive. Likewise, also when you look at the seed color, in the seed color, we found out that yellow is dominant over green. Also, when you look at the shape of the flower, round is more dominant than wrinkled. So when you come to the last one, plant height, you see the plant height, the tall ones are dominant than the dwarf plants. So these are the dominant characters and the recessive characters. So here we look at recessive. We are looking at recessive in relation to people here. You know, the last one, we are looking at dominant in relation to plants. So here we are looking at this one, so individual. We say a recessive, this is a character which does not produce its effect in the presence of the dominant character. If you look at this slide, we are using the face of human being here. Like in the face, we have the hair. Which one is dominant and which one is recessive? You see the hair, curly and black, is dominant over smooth and light colored. So that means the one that does not show, it is recessive. It is there, but it does not show, or it does not express itself much. What we can see is the outward one is the dominant one, the one that is more. And also when you look at the eye, we are looking at how wide the eye. Some people, their eyes are wide. Some people, their eyes are very small. Sometimes even to see, they struggle. So the wide eye is more dominant than the narrow one. So also you look at the last one there, the earlobe and the eye color. If the earlobe is free earlobe, but the other one is attached. It's as if something is just come and you fix it here. It's attached earlobe. By the image, you can even see that how the earlobe is free and this one is attached. And then the eye color, you see, this one is black, and the other one is what? Is blue. So these are recessive genes, and these are found in what? Plants and also in individuals. So also in genetics, Mendel also come up what we call F1 generation and F2 generation. In Mendel's experiment, he come up with a pure breeding pea plant and a dwarf plant. He crossed them. The offspring, he named them the F1 generation. Like for instance, when a man and a woman marries, when the man and a woman marries, their children, the children that they have is called the F1 generation. So now, if the children now goes and get married and have other children, they are called the F2 generation. That's what Mendel was doing with his plant. So the first children, they say the generation produced by crossing homozygous parent stock is called F1 generation. And F2 generation is the generation produced by crossing the two F1 generation. When you have the two offsprings and you cross them together, they have what you call an F2 generation. Like what Mendel did here, he have a purple flower and a white flower. He crossed it, he have what you call a heterozygous purple flower. So when he took this heterozygous flower and crossed them, they also produces 3:1. That means 3 flowers are purple and 1 is white. So that's what you call the F2 generation. We still come back to 3:1 again. So heredity. Heredity is the transmission of characters from parents to their offspring. When characters are transferred, and if you look at we look at traits, and we look at some of these traits are being transferred, some of these traits and some of these genes are being transferred from the parents to the offspring. And we said when some of these characters are being transferred, they're transferred from their parent to their offspring. So that process is called hereditary. We say traits or characters are passed on from parent to their offspring during fertilization. How are these characters passed? During fertilization, the male releases the sperm, the female releases what? The ovum, the egg. And during that process of fertilization, traits are being passed from the male and from the male to the offspring and from the female to the offspring. The transmission of these traits to offspring is referred to as inheritance. So now we are going to look at monohybrid inheritance. Monohybrid inheritance, I said the person that we give credit to these forms of inheritance is Gregor Mendel. Gregor Mendel came up with this developed genetics. He says, Gregor Mendel, a genetic scientist, solved a fundamental problem of inheritance with his research on a garden pea. And then when he was solving this problem, he came with the first law. Okay, he came up with a law. And one of these laws is called the law of what? Segregation. And what did Gregor Mendel say in this law of segregation? He stated that the characteristics of an organism are determined by internal factors called gene. These internal factors, they determine the characteristics of an organism. And he said these genes also they occur in pair. And only one can be represented in a single gamete. You do not take these two genes and represent them in a single gamete. Only one can be represented in a single gamete. And he also went on to say that they are independently transmitted from one generation to another. So these genes, they're independently transmitted from one generation to another. So here, we are looking at Gregor Mendel in his work, doing his work in a garden pea. Just look at let me just read the writings under Gregor Mendel's work. He said, thanks to Mendel's groundbreaking work in genetics, we now know that peers and men can't breed together, no matter how many times you try. That means that peers, plants, and human beings, you cannot breed them together, no matter how many times you've tried. Okay? And, I don't want to go to that other area where you talk about this homosexuality, because those things, they don't even match. Even plants cannot do that, so let me not go to that other area. So like he says, in Mendel's experiment, what he does is what? He chooses a pure breeding tall pea plant. One cross, and then he crossed this pure breeding tall plant with a dwarf plant. So now when he crossed these plants, what did he have? He said the seeds resembling from these crosses were collected and sown. It was found out that all the seeds give rise to tall. He took a pure breeding tall plant and crossed it with a pure breeding short plant. That means that the genes is homozygous tall and homozygous short. What did he have in the F1 generation? He found out that all the F1 generation, all the plants were all tall. The resulting seeds were sown, and the offspring and then all the F1 plants were all tall. So now he took the F1 plants and he crossed them. What happens again? He realized that the 3 plants were tall and 1 plant short. That is, the ratio is 3:1. This is an example of the cross. Mendel took a tall plant and crossed it with a dwarf plant. He got all the offsprings for F1 generations were tall. And then he took them again, he crossed them between the F1 generations. He have phenotypes, their outward appearance, 3 were tall, 1 was short. Genotypic appearance is 1:2:1. So now when you look at this, one is homozygous tall, another one is heterozygous tall, and the other one is what? Is dwarf. Monohybrid inheritance here, we are talking, this another, that was in plants. So this one, we are talking about this monohybrid inheritance in human. And this is what Gregor Mendel used. Okay, monohybrid inheritance in humans. And here, albinism is a condition that affects monohybrid inheritance. We said, and albinism is transferred, or is the way genes are transferred in the same like the Mendelian fashion. That was what he was doing. He said albinism is a condition in which a skin pigment fails to develop as a result of the person having a light skin, white hair, and pink ears. And we say albinism is a condition of a recessive gene, A, on the autosome. So now when you talk about the autosome chromosomes, these are chromosomes apart from what? The sex chromosomes. Okay? All the other chromosomes, the sex chromosome is what? The X and the Y chromosomes that determine the sex. But other chromosomes, that is apart from the sex chromosome, is what? The autosome chromosomes. It says the dominant gene for normal skin is A, and the genotype for a normal skin person is uppercase A, or heterozygous A. Genotype for albino skin is lowercase aa. Both sexes are equally affected. This is an example of what? An albinism. For a normal couple to give birth to an albino child, both parents must be heterozygous or carriers. For parents to have an albino child, both of the parents should have what you call a heterozygous, or they should have what? Carrier, before they can have albino. If they are not carriers, that means they cannot have an albino child. And albino is a condition whereby the skin fails to produce pigmentation. And sometimes the eyes become small. So now, other things also that leads to this abnormally, we have what you call cystic fibrosis. And this is a medical condition, and it's cystic fibrosis and chondrostrophic dwarfism. We say cystic fibrosis is a genetic disorder that affects mostly the lungs, but also the pancreas, liver, kidney, and the intestine. If you look at this slide here, in the lungs, you see there's a thick spot there. That shows that there's a forms of fibrosis there, cystic fibrosis. And then most of the people who are affected with this type of disease do not go up to they do not go up to adult life. Sometimes they die in the process. And the way this cystic fibrosis is being transmitted is the same like that of Mendelian genetics in albinism in humans, and also in that of our plant. We also have what we call chondrostrophic dwarfism. This is a form of dwarfism that occurs as a result of what? The legs become short. If you look at this slide, you see this dog, the legs, the back legs and the front legs, they are short. So it's an abnormal, it's a disease, a genetic disease. You say it's a disease characterized by shortening and deformed legs and arms, because the legs are deformed. This chondrostrophic dwarfism, it is caused by a dominant gene. When this type of gene is there in the body, is affect, which exact is effect in either homozygous or a heterozygous condition. When its effect is homozygous or heterozygous condition. So before I make a leave of you, I will leave you with this assignment. What is a monohybrid cross? What is a monohybrid cross? So the B part says, if the recessive gene responsible for skin color in albinism in human is recessive by A, that is lowercase a, what are the possible genotypes and phenotypes of the offspring produced by a homozygous normal and a heterozygous albino woman? So one of the things that you have to look at, a homozygous normal, okay, man, and a heterozygous albino woman. So this is the assignment for the next class. I was your teacher, Samuel A. Mendy. Until I come your way next time. Bye-bye.